Hey guys, it's Chris with Nichols Retirement Empire. Today I'm going to show you how you can save some money. Got your attention, didn't I? How you can save some money. You can save some money fishing with your float rigs if you rig your float rig the way I'm about to show you. Now, I'm sitting out on the back porch. This is South Georgia. It's hot. So I might sweat, guys. I just want to let you know. If you see me glistening, glowing, that's what's going on. Okay. The first thing I do is I take my line. This is 30-pound spider wire. Okay. I use braid. I don't care what kind of braid it is. I actually like the braid that's like yellow or white because you can see it easy when you tie it. The fish don't see it. We'll see here in a minute that this is not going to affect the fishing whatsoever. But bottom line is I buy what's on sale. And I usually use heavier braid than I would use if it was monofilament line because, like I said, this is one of the money saving parts of it. Use a heavy braid. Okay. A float rig, when I tie this, you're going to see that it is not the same as something like this Versamax bolt. Okay, what this is more of a popping float kind of thing. And what happens is you tie this end to your braid, and then on this end you have some line that comes down, and then you have a jig on it. Okay, and it just floats on top of the water. This, however long this line is how far it hangs down in the water, and you pop it, and the jig goes along as you pop it. A float rig, like I'm going to tie, is not like this. Okay, it's not a popping cork. It's entirely different the way that you fish what I'm about to show you. So don't think that this is the same thing. And there's all kind of different brands of this. This one actually has a way that you can wrap the line down here on this end of it, and then you can adjust the length of your line where your jig or your hook is. Okay, which is pretty cool. But I used to use those, and I do use those if I'm in a different location where I'm fishing flats, like grass flats. But over here on the Georgia coast, where everybody uses a float rig, I'm going to show you how I fish my shrimp with this. All right. Now, my pole, this is the end of my pole, okay? So as I rig this, just think we're going away from the pole, all right? Once I rig this up. Now you have to have a stopper, all right? A line stopper or a float stopper. Now there's different kinds of these. The kind that I use, and this is a money-saving tip, the kind that I use on this line is both kinds. Okay, you have this kind that you take and you run your line. It has a little loop in it, a little bitty tiny loop, and you take your line and you run it through that little loop, and then the little bobber stopper right there, you hold it in your finger and you pull it, and then it comes off, leaving the rest of this behind, and it is now on my line. All right, and what that does is you can adjust it up and down, and that's going to be important later on. I'll show you why that's important. Okay, so I put that on there. All right, and some of you guys are going to look at this, you're going to go, Chris, you have lost your mind, this is crazy. But this is what I do, and it has saved me money. I'll put it this way. This float right here, all right, I buy Bomac floats. Bomac. The reason I like these is because they tell you exactly what weight you're supposed to put on these floats. All right, this is a half-ounce float. It will hold up a half-ounce weight. All right, that's the size weight you use with this float. All right, so I use these floats. I have had this float, no lie, for 2 years. These floats are like They're $5-7 a piece, depending on what size you get. So when you buy these floats, these expensive floats, you don't want to be losing one every trip. 2 years. I've had this float 2 years. I remember when I bought it. I still have some in the pack from when I made this order. Okay? Still in the package. I haven't even used them. Alright, so this is my money saving. This is how I save the money. Alright, I take and I put this kind of bobber stopper, and you can also tie. Just take line, if you know how to make the knot, and just tie one on your line. But I like to get these pre-made ones. I'm lazy. And you run your line through that. Then you pull off. You take your string and hold it and pull off that black little tube. And you take both ends of this little string and you pull them at the same time, and it cinches down on your braid. And I cinch it as tight as I can cinch it, because eventually it kind of works loose, and I want it pretty tight. Alright, so there that is on my line. I got it so tight I can't even move it. There you go. See how hard that is to move? That's how tight you want it. Then tighten it again. Okay, and then I take these little spare pieces of yarn right here, because that's all this really is yarn. And I cut these, I snip these off, because this can actually be reeled up into my reel. Okay, that's what these are made to do, to be able to reel them all the way up into your reel. So you don't want a bunch of loose line hanging off of them. Alright, so I put both of these on my line just because. And if your float stays on there as long as my float usually does, eventually these kind of get loose. And so I like having two of them on there, because I want that stopping power of these two little devices. Alright, now the next thing that goes on here is your float. Okay, I already told you I used the Bomac float. This is a 1/2 ounce. Whenever I float rig fish, I will have on my boat at least 2 different rods with different weights of floats and float rigs, because I found this to be true. When the current is just smoking, or if I want to drift, if I'm on a flat and I can drift 100 yards, I can let my float just drift with the current, and I can just sit there as long as I can see that float. I get one of these 2-ounce ones with a 2-ounce weight, and I can let it float forever. And I got it on a reel that has a lot of line on it, and I can just let that thing float out as far as I can see it. And if that float goes down, I can start reeling the trout. Okay, so I can cover a whole lot of ground. Sometimes though, when the current is going slower, or sometimes just in general, for some reason, they want a lighter float and a lighter weight. I don't know why. I think it's because of the speed that your shrimp drifts along with the current, or the height that it sits up in the water, or the way that, I don't know what it is. All I know is sometimes they want a light float like this 1/2 ounce, and sometimes they want a heavy float like that 2 ounce. That's the best I can tell you, and it does make a difference. I have sat on the boat with people and had a certain weight, and the other person had a different weight, and them completely and totally wear me out with us doing the exact same thing, but for some reason, because they have that lighter weight or that heavier weight or whatever, they're catching fish. I can't explain it. So I always make sure, and I always have one that works better than the other. And to be honest with you, a lot of times I'll have 3 float rig rods if I'm by myself. I'll have a 1 ounce, I'll have a 1/2 ounce, and I'll have a 2 ounce. That's what I do. All right, so now we have to run this through the float. This is the end of the float that sets up in the water. So remember, the rod's over here, so we're going this way, away from the rod. And that's another reason I like braid. It's because it's easy to run through this little hole, okay? Because this is not the easiest thing to do. This braid's pretty stiff. It's spider wire. It's 30-pound spider wire, and it's pretty easy to run through. So I ran it all the way through. So there's the weight. This is a 1/2 ounce weight. Okay, your weight needs to match the weight for your float to hold. If it's too heavy, your float will sink in the water. If it's too light, your float will lay on its side. I want that float to sit straight up and down so I can see it, and I want to know if that float moves or if that float sinks or anything happens, that this thing is balanced. Okay, it's not because the weight's too heavy. It's because there's a fish or because I'm snagged on something. Now, after I get my line through my float, all right, the next thing I put on this line is a bead. Ideally, I want a bead with the smallest little hole I can find. You'll see why in a minute, but I want that bead to be able to stop my float before it gets to the next thing, which is my weight. I don't want that float and my weight bouncing together. All right, this is the money saving secret I'm about to show you right here. And it seems so very obvious to do, and it's going to seem kind of silly when I do it, but that's okay, because y'all can laugh at me all you want. I'm buying weights once every 3 or 4 years, while some people go through them all the time. And you can buy floats. I'm going through floats every 2 or 3 years, while some people are going through floats every week. And you can buy the cheap little floats if you want to, but I like these floats. They're durable, they last a long time, they're worth the money, and I'm not going to lose them. So this is the money saving secret. All right, I take this line and I double it, and I double a big section of it like that. Okay, then I take it and I double it again. All right, then I take that and I start tying granny knots. I make a loop. I hear you, baby. And I take these ends. My cat helps me a lot when I do this. I take these ends and I start running them through this loop. And I make a nice big knot. Now, I want my float bead to stop at that knot. So I need to make that knot big enough to where it's going to stop that bead. So I'm going to take it and I'm going to do another little granny knot. Then I cinch it down again. I want a nice big fat knot right there. Big enough. I'll do it again. A nice big fat knot. See that? Now you're like, man, don't these fish see all this crap? No, they don't see any of this. Okay. Actually, some fish see it and they eat it. Sharks, they'll just eat it. But anyway, so these are my two ends, and this is the leftover part. I cut the leftover part off. All right, there that goes. So now I got this big knot. I got this bead that's going to stop when it hits that knot. All right. No, Jade, it's not for you to play with. That cat. Jade, no. I got my float, then I got my stoppers. Okay, in that order. All right, now, because I got these loops on here and I got 2 of them. Remember what test this line was? This is 30-pound test. Well, I'm about to take these 2 loops right here that are doubled up. And I'm going to take my 1/2 ounce weight. I'm going to stick them through the eye of my 1/2 ounce weight. All right, just like that. Then I'm going to open them up together like that. And I'm going to slide my weight through it. I'm going to take it around my weight like that. Now, that's 60 pounds. Actually, that's, I don't know, it's like 120. It's like crazy. This is not going to break. All right. This monofilament leader, which is like 20 pounds, this is going to break way before this ever breaks. That's why I never lose a float. And you can ask Paul, but the guy I fish with all the time down there in St. Mary's. I've seen him lose float after float after float after float. I never lose. Ask him how many times he's seen me lose a float. Maybe. And all the times we fish together, I might have lost one float. Maybe. And it's the same floats all the time. So I take about 15 pounds, 20 pounds. Now this is the part that the fish sees. This part right here. So I got a couple of feet, okay, of monofilament. You don't have to use monofilament. You can use whatever you want, but it needs to break. I got a couple of feet of that. I got my little trout hook that I like to use. I like to use a Kale hook, usually about a 1/0 or something like that. And I just tie that to my weight. Tie me a little knot there. I'll just tie improved clinch knot. That's usually what I tie. Just because I've tied it for so long, I don't have to stop and think when I tie it. All right. Cut off the tag end of that. So now, and usually my leader is a little bit longer than this. This is kind of a short leader for me. Sometimes they want a really long leader. But now my float is floating along in the water. This leader and then the shrimp is behind it. Okay. Now, well, Chris, what's the difference between this and just having the popping cord? Why can't I just tie it to the popping float? Well, if I take my little bobber stops and I push them all the way down to my bobber, that means the bobber is going to be sitting in the water. This weight's going to be about 6 inches below that bobber, and the shrimp's going to be pretty much on the surface, which is what you get with the regular popping cork. So the popping cork's kind of rattling and popping. This right here, you know, you get a little bit of noise because you got that bead on there. But this right here is it's just the shrimps dragging on the top of the water. But sometimes, and a lot of times, it does better if I raise this up a foot or two, and then the float comes up, gets stopped by the bobber stoppers. The line is down here a foot below the water, and then my shrimp is tailing along a foot deep. If I want it 3 foot deep, I raise it up to 3 foot. Now the sinker and the hook are 3 feet down in the water, floating along. Okay, if I want it 12 feet deep, I can make it 12 feet deep, because as I reel in, this right here will reel right up into my reel. It's not going to mess up my cast. It goes right through the eyes of my rod. And I can fish 12 foot deep, 15 foot deep with this. Now, do I do that all the time? No. Normally, I have it set maybe that deep, you know, or all the way down. I mean, it just depends on what time of year it is, what the trout want, what the redfish want, whatever. But ideally, what I want is this to be at the depth a lot of times where this weight is on the bottom and bumping the ground, you know, like a Carolina rig. So I throw it out there, and the current, usually the way I like to fish it is for the current going away from me. And I'll throw it out there, and if it's 2 foot deep, you know, I'll have it rigged where it's 2 feet. This is up here, and then this weight is bouncing as it goes away from me, and it's dragging this shrimp behind it. So you have this weight, you know, hitting the shells or hitting the bottom and going bump, 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 and then here comes the shrimp behind it. It works great. It's like crankbait fishing in reverse. You know, a crankbait, you throw it out there and you reel it in, and it bumps along the bottom. This right here goes away from you and bumps along the bottom. Or you can have it just floating on top. It's very versatile. A very versatile way to fish. And with my 2 ounce one, I use a level wine bait casting reel. With this light one, like this little 1/2 ounce one or a 1/4 ounce one, I use a spinning reel. I could use a bait caster for either way. A bait caster really is better because as it drifts away from you, you can control the speed of the line easier with your hands. With a spinning reel, you have to kind of keep your hand on it because you don't want to let your line get a bunch of bow in it as it's drifting along. Or you can throw it out there and fish it like a popping cork and pop it, and reel it to you a little bit and pop it, and reel it to you a little bit and pop it. You know, and it'll pop down in the water. You can fish it that way. Like I said, there's a lot of versatility to this. But this is almost exclusively what I fish when I fish live shrimp. Is this. I'll fish this, or I'll fish just a Carolina rig for live shrimp. And then sometimes you can just use a hook and your line with a live shrimp and let it drift. That's a good thing too. But here on the Georgia coast, the current is so strong, it's kind of hard to do that. You need a little bit of control like you have with these floats. So that's how I rig it. This is not going to break. I will use this until the float tears up or the sinker tears up, usually. Or every once in a while it'll get so frayed up and so old, like it's rotting, and I'll retie it. That's how often I get to retie that. I mean, I hardly ever have to tie these things. I'll put it on there and I'll go fishing 2 months before I have to retie this because of the way I tie it. So it saves you time. All right, and it took me some time to do that. Yeah, it's a pain in the butt. Yeah, that's complicated. My Lord, why don't just tie it to it, man? What are you doing? I'm saving myself time in the long run, and I'm saving myself money, and I'm not getting out there on the water and losing floats and losing time because this thing is breaking. The only thing that's going to break, like I said, is this. All right, guys. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, let me know. Usually if people ask me questions, I don't like to type a whole big long explanation. I would rather talk to them on the phone or do a video to show them what I'm doing. But that is not what everybody else does. I know that. All people that use float rigs basically are doing the same thing. They all have a bobber stopper, a float, and a weight, and a hook. They're all doing that. But those few little things that I showed you there are going to save you a lot of time and money. I promise you. All right. So thanks for watching, guys. Nichols Retirement Empire, and we will see you out on the water.